Welcome to A Shock in the Dark. I'm the narrator, tonight coming to you from a city that many would consider to be a part of Phoenix. But in reality, it's its own city here in Maricopa County, Arizona. I'm talking about Glendale. For every episode of Season 5 of the show, I'm driving all over the United States, traveling to where your letters take me, and getting as close as I am able to the actual locations mentioned in each story. That's why right now I'm in a hotel, practically next door to the setting for tonight's letter. For the sake of privacy, I'll just say I'm near 99th Avenue and Camelback Road in Glendale, Arizona, for this letter. Hi, A Shock in the Dark. I'm attaching my actual address and real name. Please don't share that information. I'm going to change my name for this so my neighbors or people at work don't think I'm crazy. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, my wife and I were living in some apartments not far from the Biltmore area of Phoenix when I reconnected on Facebook with a guy I went to high school with. My wife and I ended up going to meet him for a beer near his place in Glendale, about a 20-minute drive from our place. We met up at this place called House Murphy's, which, if you're in town, you should check it out. My wife and I go here all the time now. They have great German food and fresh pretzels, good beer. Anyway, it turns out this guy is in real estate. My wife perked up immediately when she heard that. We've been dreaming of buying a house, but honestly, we didn't know the first thing about it, and we didn't think we had enough money or credit. But a house? That's my wife's dream. No more neighbors living above you that sound like they're bowling at 3 o'clock in the morning. By the time we polished off a couple of beers and downed a giant pretzel, he had us convinced we could do it. My wife was all in. I was skeptical, but he said, "You got 10 minutes? I want to show you something." So we ended up driving out to a neighborhood right off of Camelback Road and pulled up in front of this really nice house. Small, but way more than we could hope for. And it has the most unusual feature for this city: a basement. Nobody in this whole city has a basement. He got the key out of the lockbox on the front door, and we went in and looked around. It looked like somebody was still living there, but he assured us the owner was gone, but they just hadn't moved their stuff out yet. Well, we ended up buying that house just a few weeks later, thanks in no small part to my friend who really taught us everything we needed to know and pushed through the whole process for us. And before you think it, no, we didn't get it cheap because it was haunted. It's just a house, from what I can tell. However, there is one thing that has happened here that has left my wife and I scratching our heads and a little nervous. About 2 or 3 weeks after we had moved in, on a Sunday night around 10 o'clock, my wife and I were about to go to bed when there was a knock at the door. We had installed a Ring doorbell, but they knocked. I got up, opened the door, and there's this very small, elderly woman, all stooped over. She looks up at me and says, and I'm not sure that every word is exact, but this is almost word for word what she said. She said,
"I beg your pardon for the intrusion, young man, but I used to live here until recently, and I believe I left my sewing kit in the basement. If it pleases you, I do hope you wouldn't mind if I retrieved it."
I may not be the biggest or strongest guy in the world, but if she was here to rob me, a slight breeze might have knocked her over. So I wasn't worried about that. Plus, it was a rare night when it was raining here, so of course, I invited her in. I offered to go look in the basement for her, but she insisted that she was just fine getting it herself, and it would be faster that way. I offered to go look in the basement for her, but she insisted she was just fine getting it herself, and it would be faster that way because she knew exactly where it was. And she proceeded to open the basement door, turn on the light, and go downstairs. My wife and I just looked at each other, half smiling and kind of shrugging like, What the you-know-what? A few minutes passed, and I opened the basement door and shouted out, "Hey, you okay down there?" But she didn't reply. So I walked halfway down the stairs and I shouted again, "Hey, are you okay down there?" No reply. I walked all the way into the basement, and she was not there. I looked everywhere, and eventually I called my wife, and we both looked around, but this lady was just nowhere to be found. She had completely disappeared without a trace. There is no other exit from the basement. Only that one stairway. Only that one door. And both my wife and I were standing in view of that door the whole time. Now, Arizona law does not require disclosure if there's been a death in a property. But you betcha first thing the next day, I called my friend and straight up asked him. I said, "Matt, you gotta give it to me straight, man. Whose house was this before we bought it, and did they die in the house?" He said, "Hey man, even though I'm not required to, I always tell a buyer if something bad has happened on a property. To me, that's just good business, so no, nobody died there. But why are you asking me this now?" I told him the story. He said it was an older woman who owned the property. And she did die, but she had been in the hospital for months before she passed away. He gave me the name. A quick Google search brought up a photo of the previous owner. It was not the woman who showed up at our door. I'm sure if it was, this would be a much better ghost story. At least it would have a conclusion. But it's just not what happened. The lady who owned the house before us looked nothing like the lady that showed up at our door. And that just has us even more confused now. We have no idea what that was or why it happened. And just so you know, nothing else weird has happened in this house before or since. I love your show, and I would like to ask, please, if you know of something or have an idea or even a theory of what that was, I would appreciate it so much if you could say on your show, or if somebody else who listens could even provide a wild guess. That would be better than what we have now, because we just have no idea. P.S. My wife just mentioned to me this, and I hadn't even thought about it until now. She just said this. That night, the old lady came over. It was raining. And thinking back on it, that old lady wasn't even the slightest bit damp. She left no wet footprints on the hardwood floor. I don't know. I hope that information helps you help me figure out what it is. Thanks again, your friend, Anonymous. Well, Anonymous, I really wish I did have even a theory of what that's all about. I would suggest that you check out who lived on the property before the previous owner. Maybe you'll find something there. But be sure to let us know if you have any updates. I'd like to pass it along. I appreciate that. Until then, the Shock in the Dark tour of the United States continues. And as your letters dictate my journey next week, maybe I'll be where you are. To support this channel and keep it running, please subscribe, make a comment, any comment. And in the meantime, this is the narrator saying good night, whoever you are.